Every day, without exception, the largest ships ever built move through the same narrow corridor of water. 1 in every 5 barrels of oil consumed anywhere on Earth passes through a single gap of water 33 kilometers wide. There are no real alternatives, no bypass large enough, no route that changes the arithmetic. If this strait closes, even briefly, fuel prices rise globally, supply chains break, economies feel it within days. This is the Strait of Hormuz, the most important passage of water on Earth. And sitting directly inside it, 5 miles off the Iranian coast, surrounded by the largest ships ever built, in the middle of the most watched waterway on the planet, is a small island almost nobody knows exists. An island so geologically strange, it looks like it belongs on another planet. This is Hormuz Island. The strait that controls the world's energy is named after an island. And almost nobody knows the island exists. Hormuz, 5 miles off the Iranian mainland, 8 kilometers from one end to the other, low on the water. From the coast, it appears as little more than a dark shape against the sea. Nothing about that silhouette prepares you for what you find when you arrive. Hormuz is a salt dome, pushed upward through the seafloor over millions of years. Carrying from the deep 70 distinct mineral types compressed into 8 kilometers of island, not volcanic, not formed by collision or erosion. Simply salt and mineral pressing upward through the ocean floor across geological time until it broke the surface. Parts of its coastline are red, not softly red, not red in the right light. Deeply, unmistakably, red. The color comes from iron oxide at concentrations so high that the soil became useful long before anyone thought of it as scenery. Locally called golak, ground into pigment, pressed into flatbread with oil and herbs, painted onto faces for celebrations. Exported across the Gulf as dye and spice for centuries. On this island, the geology was never something to observe from a distance. It was something to pick up, cook with, wear on your skin. The red soil enters the water too. Where the iron-rich ground meets the sea, the tide pulls a reddish stain along the shoreline, as if the island is bleeding slowly into the Gulf. Just along the coast, where the shoreline curves and the rock face drops closer to the water, the landscape shifts register entirely. Wind and rain have been working on the softer rock here for millions of years, cutting corridors between formations, carving columns from ridgelines, leaving arches and isolated towers rising directly from the coastal rock with no obvious geometric logic and no architectural equivalent. Walking through here, the mind does what it always does when confronted with shapes that resist easy explanation. It finds figures, a dragon stretched across a ridge, an eagle crouching on a promontory, the weathered face of something that was never alive but looks as though it once was. None of it placed here, none of it carved by human hands, just rock and enough time, and wind that found the soft places and kept working, not named by geologists, given by the people who walked through it and saw what the rock had become. The Valley of Statues. On windy days, air moving through the narrow gaps produces sounds that local communities have described for generations as the valley speaking, not because the stone is alive, simply because wind moving through broken surfaces can sound strangely deliberate. Moving inland from the coast, the island reveals what makes it genuinely unlike anywhere else on Earth. The mountains of Hormuz are not one color. They are not two colors. They are every color the Earth keeps underground. What you are seeing is the interior of the salt dome, made visible at the surface. Each band of color represents a different mineral layer, carried upward from different depths over millions of years and laid bare by erosion. Red iron oxide, white gypsum, yellow sulfur, purple manganese, gray salt, black volcanic compound, running in horizontal lines across cliff faces and mountain slopes. A cross-section of geological time written in color across the surface of a small island in the Persian Gulf. The bands are not uniform, they fold, they bend, they fracture, where the salt dome pushed harder in one place than another. In places, the layers are perfectly horizontal, like pages in a book laid flat. In others, they curve upward as if the rock beneath them is still moving, still deciding where to go. In the early morning, when the sun is low and the light strikes the cliff faces at an angle, the colors are at their most saturated. Red becomes crimson, yellow becomes gold, white becomes silver. An hour later, as the sun rises higher and the light flattens, the same surfaces read differently. The same valley, the same minerals, a completely different landscape. Standing inside these formations, it is difficult to process that what you are looking at is simply the natural result of salt and pressure and time. There is no useful comparison, no other place on Earth where geology produces this specific combination of scale, color, and accessibility. You can walk up to it, run your hand along the surface, feel the mineral texture of rock that has been moving upward through the ocean floor for 600 million years. And somewhere a few miles offshore from where you are standing, 20 million barrels of oil are moving through the strait that carries this island's name. Two facts about the same place that have almost nothing to do with each other. Back at the shore, the island presents yet another version of itself. Slowly, white cliffs rising directly from the water. Not the dramatic red of the southern coast, not the layered colors of the interior. Quietly, something quieter. Something that takes a moment to understand as part of the same island. thoughtful. The white here comes from gypsum and salt, the same minerals that appear as thin bands in the Rainbow Valley inland, but here concentrated into entire cliff faces bleached by centuries of salt wind and sun. Slowly, the rock has a different texture too, not the hard, compressed ridges of the red iron oxide coastline. Softer, more layered, as if the cliff face is still in the process of deciding its final form, quietly. Where the cliffs meet the water, the pale sand catches the light, differently from anywhere else on the island. Slowly, turquoise water, white rock, pale sand, thoughtful. A coastline that looks like it belongs in the Mediterranean, sitting inside the world's most contested waterway, 3 miles from the Iranian mainland. Quietly, the same island, 8 kilometers across. Every few hundred meters, a completely different world. "3,000 people live here, mostly fishermen whose dialect carries traces of Portuguese, Arabic, Hindi, and Dutch, absorbed across centuries of competing occupation. Every power that understood what the strait controlled eventually came for this island. The Portuguese arrived in 1507. They built their fort from the same red stone that covers the island's northern shore. At the time, Hormuz was one of the wealthiest trading ports in the known world. Spices from India, silk from China, pearls from the Gulf, all of it passing through this island on the way to markets in Europe and beyond. The Portuguese understood that controlling Hormuz meant controlling the flow of wealth between east and west. They held it for over a century before being expelled by a combined Iranian and British force in 1622. 500 years later, the fort's walls are still standing, slowly dissolving back into the landscape they were quarried from, returned stone by stone to the island that provided them. The island's minerals were never only beautiful. For centuries, the red iron oxide soil, golak, was ground, traded, and exported as pigment, spice, and dye across the Gulf and beyond. It was one of the few things this small island could sell to the wider world. In recent decades, extraction restrictions were imposed after overcollection began visibly damaging the island's surface. The resource that sustained the island's economy for generations was being removed faster than the geology could replace it. The coral reefs offshore face a different kind of pressure. The Persian Gulf is one of the fastest warming bodies of water on Earth. As water temperatures rise, coral bleaches and dies. And with it, the fish populations that the island's residents have depended on for generations. Less mineral income, declining fish catches, no replacement economy. Every summer, when the heat peaks and the fishing slows, the working-age population leaves for the mainland. Not permanently, but in large enough numbers that by midsummer, the island operates at half its usual population. The very young remain, the very old remain, and the landscape remains, still producing its colors, still pushing minerals toward the surface, still reshaping itself through wind and rain, still indifferent to the economic systems that have tried to extract value from it across 5 centuries of occupation.